All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you today, and I hope you enjoyed yesterday's program. I'm going to respond to some comments I got both about yesterday. One comment about yesterday. There were actually two, but I'm going to talk about one briefly, and then I'll get into the main topic of today's program, which is the actual harm, the actual number of deaths, and there's so much more than just specific deaths that have resulted from the human-caused climate cataclysm, the new holocaust, if you will. But I want to just focus on the number of actual deaths. Of course, there's so much more people being displaced, climate refugees, disease, debilitation, reduced quality of life, poverty. Those are all, results. Those are all secondary to the human-caused climate crisis. But I just want to talk a little bit, or talk a lot maybe, about the number of deaths and how I calculated. This was also triggered by this conversation, catalyzed by a comment from one of my loyal viewers, formerly a listener, who asked for a source or sources for my statement earlier this week that there have been millions of deaths resulting already, not in the future, not in futuro, but actually already having occurred because of what humans are doing to the climate. So we'll get into that. Also, we'll revisit Israel-Palestine, and I'll talk about a couple of folks I'm not really happy. I don't really like them. I'm pretty critical of them, people who are well known to you. Some of you may like them quite a bit. I don't, but I'm going to try to be as fair to them as I know how. All right, let's start with this comment from yesterday's program. By the way, I enjoyed it. I like a lot speaking to Elizabeth. She's a little salty. Her language can be maybe not what everyone wants on a family-friendly live stream, which I try to present. I try to provide. I did put a warning, by the way, and this is what I'm going to do going forward. If there's salty or, in cases going beyond that, vulgar language, I'll have a vulgar language alert. And I also noted not for kids for yesterday's program. I definitely still think it's worth watching if you're up for that. If you want to hear, some four-letter words and it's not a problem for you. And many of you like the four-letter words. I know that some listeners, viewers, always felt constrained by the SEC, was it the SEC? FCC rules regarding language. Never bothered me. I'm not a big cursor. Every now and then I do throw out an F-bomb or an S-bomb, but it's rare. It's usually when I'm really upset, or maybe rarely, though, for effect. But I have heard people say, yeah, you don't really curse. No, I just don't. Can I tell you? It was never a problem for me, keeping within the FCC rules, not saying the 7 words. But some people like to use all the words that there are out there in the English language, and I understand that as well. For this program, we try very hard not to go beyond the PG rating. I do note that Flying Robot had a reaction, so that's why I'm bringing this up. So thank goodness the little bots aren't listening. I hear you, Robot. Yeah, I would keep yesterday's program away from the pre-teen bots anyway, and you may even want to up the age there a little bit. Of course, that's up to you and up to them. I mean, I never had any control, really. I know that maybe that's bad parenting. I never really had any control over what my kids watched, and I certainly don't now, or they're both adults. What they view, what they listen to, that's up to them. I've got enough problems of my own to deal with theirs most of the time. All right, if you want to join me, 240-363-7190. It is Halitics, and I am, again, Hal Ginsberg. Would love to talk to you. All right, so it's not just about the language. That's very little about what this show's about, rarely. I guess the two topics I focus most on are what I view the two greatest challenges to humanity's survival. But it's not just survival. It's also about a decent quality of life. And I do think they are the human-caused climate cataclysm, the new holocaust, and endless war, which is also a holocaust. So I've been focusing recently on the Israel-Palestine conflict and really just how cruel, how wrong, how I call them war crimes, we can describe Israel's actions of late. And this does not mean I'm somehow excusing Hamas, but I get where Hamas, I do. I understand what motivated them. I guess I understand what's motivating Israel as well. But what Israel is doing is only making themselves less and less safe and putting their very survival in jeopardy. So even if you don't care, and I care deeply about the lives of the 2 million Gazans and however many Palestinians live on the West Bank, I care deeply about their lives. Every single one of them is, as Dr. West would say, as precious as any other life on this planet, any Israeli life, any American life. We're all precious creatures, as Dr. West would say. That's why, and he walks that walk. He doesn't just talk it. So that's why I support him. But even if you don't care, right? Even if you just care about Israel, you got to recognize that what Israel's doing is not only just morally atrocious, but it's also actually putting their lives at risk as well, the survival of that country. But right now, we're going to talk about the perhaps even greater threat to all life beyond endless war, and that is the human-caused climate cataclysm. And Jeff, who I guess I shouldn't say his name, but he identifies himself by name. I'm not going to use his name further, but one of my listeners, longtime Jay, has expressed he doesn't, I don't think, question AGW, that's anthropogenic global warming. By the way, there's two Hals. Look at that. There's a Hal in red. Yeah, there you go. There's a Hal in red in your top left with a hoodie, kind of like a Little Red Riding Hood kind of effect. And then there's Hal in green. And I think I've got that same shirt on, perhaps, in the sort of the inner inset there on the top left of the inset. So I said a couple days ago during my program, Dems Blow, yet another chance for meaningful change. I said during that program, millions of people dying because of climate change. And I'm not quite clear. I think I was just saying, hey, we've got to get a grasp on this, and Democrats need to come up with solutions. And as long as there's no speaker, they won't. But even if there is a speaker, and we've got a right-wing speaker now from, I don't even know what state I'm not really focused on that too much. Yes, I should. Yeah, the Republicans finally did elect a speaker. But I made the point that this is something the Democrats need to work on, and I sort of threw it away, right? It was a throwaway line. Millions of people are dying right now because of climate change. And Jay, as he is often wont to do, skeptical, perhaps some would call that trolling. I'm okay with it. You want to know, you want a source? I want to give it to you. More than one, and I know I've got your source right here. So let's delve into where I got that number, millions already. And I did a lot of research on that this morning, just because that number's been in my mind for many years now. Millions already dead and millions more to come, maybe tens of millions more, maybe billions can die from the new Holocaust. So I sometimes use that term without really thinking where it's come from, because it's embedded, it's burrowed into my mind. And I really was struggling a little bit at first to come up with the definitive source, definitive way to justify that statement. So I thought, do I have to go on this? Oh my gosh, maybe I'm going to have to come on the program and say, yeah, well, I don't know if I can absolutely state with some kind of real confidence that number, millions, while I stand by it in terms of the ultimate impact, and maybe the current, the already suffered number of deaths by the planet. I may not be able to state it with the degree of confidence going forward that I have, but ultimately, I came to conclude, and I'm going to explain to you exactly why, that the number millions is very conservative in terms of the number of deaths already. So let's start with, this is from Monash University. That's in Australia, which is the landmass. You know, it's sometimes people call Australia a continent. I would say it's more like a landmass, part of Oceania, which is a lot of islands in the South Pacific and into the Indian Ocean. That could be considered a continent. I don't know however you want to phrase it, but as I understand it, Australia has been impacted the most. It's the hottest anyway. It's the hottest and driest landmass on the planet. So from Monash University, world's largest study of global climate-related mortality links 5 million deaths a year to abnormal temperatures, and that's a little over 2 years ago. So we've seen ever hotter temperatures since then. I believe last year was the hottest. Maybe not. Maybe 2022 wasn't. 2023 certainly shaping up to be the hottest year ever recorded. So you'd say, well, 5 million, Hal, that's a lot more than you even said. You said millions over the past, 50 years, and now it's 5 million a year. But if you look at that number, it doesn't prove that I'm right, or that, there's a very reliable source. I certainly think Monash University is reliable, but they're just saying 5 million deaths a year to abnormal temperatures. So abnormal temperatures doesn't mean climate crisis related, right? I mean, you get very hot spells, you get cold spells, and those can be considered abnormal, abnormally hot, abnormally cold. They could be due to El Nino, La Nina. They could be due to, all manner of factors that aren't necessarily the climate crisis that's human caused. So I delved deeper. I wanted to figure out exactly what that meant. 5 million deaths a year. And so more from Monash University, they actually break it down. And I'm just going to present to you right now the number of heat related, in other words, abnormally hot temperatures as opposed to abnormally cold. And by the way, the number of deaths due to abnormal cold is greater annually than the number of deaths due to abnormal heat. So you just need to, that's something to keep in mind. But for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to assume that the only deaths that could be due to the climate crisis caused by human activity are those that relate to abnormal heat waves, right? Not cold spells. Although, extreme, you do get more snow in some areas. You can get longer blizzards, hurricanes, and the like that are due secondary to the new Holocaust. But in general, it's causing temperatures to rise and rise and rise, not get colder. So I'm going to ignore, for the purposes of this conversation, the number of deaths related to abnormal cold. I will note that the number of deaths related to abnormal cold weather are declining. And Monash University, that comes from the Monash University study that we're looking at right now. You can find it easily online. World's largest climate mortality study, if you want to look for it. World's largest climate mortality study. So here in 21 are what Monash University, obviously these are estimates, rough estimates, the number of annual deaths worldwide due to heat. And this, I added them up. This is 2021. I got to approximately 635,000, or no, that's the exact count. 635,250 annual deaths due to heat. And this is going back 20 years, because if you look at that study, it's 2000 to 2019. So again, far more than the millions, right? Because if you multiply 20 times 635,250, you get, 13, 14 million, something like that. Far more than I said. But again, we can't attribute every death, even if it's due to high temperatures, solely to the climate cataclysm. We had deaths 100 years ago in cities like Philadelphia, New York, when there would be heat waves, people didn't have air conditioning back then. They were living in these brick tenements, millions of them were, and they would die. You would have people dying from yellow fever in American cities and malaria, at least in the South. And those were certainly exacerbated by heat, but it's not fair to claim that those were caused by the new Holocaust, even though temperatures had already started to rise 100 years ago as a result of fossil fuel burning. So we're not going to take that 635,250 number and say that's the number of deaths every year. And of course, it keeps rising because the temperatures get hotter, although there are countervailing factors, including more areas are air conditioned, for example, and if we distribute water better, fresh water. Of course, we're running out of fresh water. We have less fresh water every year because of the glaciers melting, because of the North and South Pole ice melting, because of the fact that we just start consuming fresh water from lakes, rivers, aquifers, and then it's not fresh anymore, right? So these are all factors beyond simply the heat that we could attribute to the climate crisis, but I want to be very, very, very conservative. I don't want anyone to say, oh, you're exaggerating, you're overstating it, you're an alarmist. So we'll just take this number and we'll say, okay, 635,000 or so people dying annually as a result of heat over the past 20 years. And where does that take us in terms of the number who are dead because of the human-caused cataclysm directly secondary to burning fossil fuels? And I looked at the Monash University study and I couldn't find, I wasn't able in that study that estimated the number of deaths every year due to extreme temperatures, I couldn't find a breakdown of the number of those that Monash University researchers were able to attribute or attempted to attribute or believed resulted from the actual dynamic of human-caused global warming. So I looked elsewhere, right? I looked for other reliable sources. I would say a world-ranked university like Monash, I believe it's a very well-known university, certainly in Australia, is credible, but I couldn't find them. They didn't tell me, well, how many of the deaths that we attribute to weather, extreme temperatures, are secondary to the new Holocaust. But I did find from another reliable source just a couple of days, just a week or so ago, the World Health Organization, of course, that's part of the United Nations, October 12 of this year, recent research attributes 37% of heat-related deaths to human-induced climate change. So we've got now a number of deaths that are due to the extreme heat. I think I just told you it's about 635,000. That came from Monash University, a very reliable source. And now another very reliable source. The United Nations is telling us of the heat-related deaths that we've observed, we can, with some degree of confidence, attribute 37% of those to human-induced climate change. So let's take the two numbers we've got, because now we've got enough evidence, enough information to at least estimate how many deaths annually result from human activity, from the new Holocaust. So let's get into that. It's not a lot. The math isn't that complicated. From Monash, annual deaths worldwide due to heat, approximately 635,000. From UN, number of heat-related deaths that can be attributed to the climate crisis caused by humans, 37%. So approximately 235,000 deaths annually just related to excessive temperatures deriving from the new Holocaust. But that 235, now, so if we say that's over this millennium, right? So 20 plus years times 235,000 is over 5 million deaths. So my millions is totally justified based on these reliable sources. And that's a very, as I said, very conservative, right? Because this is only heat. But we know malarial deaths are rising because of, mosquitoes that carry the vector. They survive. More of them are surviving. More of them are biting because temperatures are hotter. People are wearing less clothing too, which makes them more susceptible to getting a malarial bite. And it's also not just malaria. That's not the only source besides direct deaths due to heat. You also have flooding, more flooding as a result. And then again, we're only talking about death. We're not talking about the other negative impacts as a result of the climate crisis. And by the way, it's not just humans, of course, it's other animals as well. We're in the 6th grade extinction, and scientists do indeed attribute a significant percentage of those animals who are species being extinguished to climate crisis. It's not only, though, also I think a bigger factor is the loss of range, right? Their lands, the lands where the animals survive are being taken by humans, or they're being desertified as a result of the climate. So there's interlocking factors. But the bottom line is we can, with some degree of confidence, attribute millions of deaths to directly to the human-caused climate cataclysm. And there are lots of other terribly negative implications from it. And it's only going to get worse as temperatures continue to get hotter. Now, this was my little back of the envelope math. But I did want to just say it's not like I came up with this and I'm the only person, right? And I'm not even a scientist. I'm not like, who am I? I'm just some guy sitting in my basement in my t-shirt, but I'm actually on my second level in my sweatshirt. But close enough, right? But there are other people that you might find more credible than Hal Ginsberg. So I would say one of them is the former UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan, and his group, a think tank he created back 14 years ago now, as I do the math. I think if you can look, and I'll make that date just a little bit more visible for you and boost the size. Back in 2009, the Annan think tank there, or whatever it's called, attributed 300,000 deaths a year. So what did I say? 235, more than 235. So it's in the ballpark. Now this study, to be totally fair, because I want to give you all the data and all the responses, was viewed with some skepticism. For example, they used figures, the Annan think tank used figures where they would simply look at, compare the number of deaths in the 2000s versus the deaths in the 80s due to hurricanes and other extreme weather events. And yes, the number had jumped, but that was a bit of a stretch to say every single person who died in a hurricane over in the 2000s over the same number, the number of deaths from the same causes in the 80s, that every single one of those new or excess deaths was the result of the climate crisis. I mean, you have also more people on the planet, so you can confidently expect a little more people will die from extreme weather. You have more people living in low-lying areas, so floods in the same area, say in Calcutta, Kolkata, in Pakistan, which are areas that have been extremely hard hit, and other global south communities, Jakarta. I don't know if that's what it's now called, the capital of Indonesia and Java. So these cities, third world, second world cities, global south cities have been extremely hard hit. Part of that is hotter temperatures. Part of that is higher populations. And it seems as though a non-think tank may have not fully taken into account other factors when calculating this number. But again, the 300,000 is pretty consistent with the number that we came up with, a little higher, which takes a percentage of heat-related deaths and attributes those with some degree of confidence to human activity, to burning fossil fuels. So that's not the only source. There are other estimates which also are consistent with my back of the envelope 235,000 plus. So from the United Nations, here's Al Jazeera, and they're giving you a number based on a United Nations report. Climate change causes 2 million deaths in 50 years. Poor suffer most. That's the UN. And again, millions. So that's it's important for me to justify, because I want my credibility, and not that it's beyond question. I get things wrong all the time, so you should question what I say, but I'm not making things up. I'm not just coming up with some, number out of my butt. It's based on research. It's based on some degree of knowledge, and others know more, and I'm wrong all the time. But when you say, well, surely you have a source, yes, I do. Yes, I do. And so that, by the way, 2 million deaths, here's the actual, more of that front page, or I don't know, do you call it front page when it's online? I don't know. But again, from Al Jazeera, what do they say? 2 million deaths in 50 years. This is Dateline, May 22nd this year. Okay, so this is all very contemporary, very recent information. You can see folks there in Malawi, I guess is how it's pronounced. If I got that wrong, certainly correct me. And if you want to call in, I'd love to talk to you. 240-363-7190. By the way, don't forget, you gotta like, and you, even more importantly, even if you hate it, don't like it then, but subscribe. Come on, man, let's get those numbers up. I'm stuck at 159, man. That is so little. I hate to, for what you're getting, and I'll brag. I know Jeff very justly, I think he sometimes tries to troll me. I don't love that, but I love that he is so invested in my program to watch it and comment, and I appreciate that so much. But he has very fairly criticized me for being a bit of a boaster, a bit of boastful, and I always tell my kids, what does everyone love? A bragger. Two things everyone loves: a bragger and a tattle. So that's what I would tell, when one kid, oh, Michael did this, William did that, oh, everyone loves a tattle. So yes, I think what I'm providing here is a pretty nice, reasonably professional. I know I get something the audio ain't great, and there's issues, and I don't do everything perfectly. I sure as heck don't. I'm trying my best to get better and better. I still think it's pretty damn good. So, of course I do. If I didn't, I wouldn't do it. So, reward me, placate me, please. If you haven't yet, click subscribe. And new viewer Jim, I don't know if you subscribed. If you didn't, I ask you to subscribe. Let's get to a different story. Now, I've focused a lot on the carnage in Gaza, Israel causing it. But there's deaths in the United States too, we know. And it's terrible. This was a place I would not have pegged for being where people would be killed. And that is Maine. Been to Maine. Love the Mainers. Love the Maniacs. Call them what you will. It's a really beautiful state. I'm a big blueberry fan, so there's that. This guy slaughtered, now we have a number up to 18 people. Let's go to CBS News yesterday in Lewiston, Maine. Let's go to CBS Maine.
We are continuing to follow developing news out of Lewiston, Maine, where at least 16 people are dead this morning after a mass shooting. The victims were at a restaurant and a bowling alley when they were gunned down. Several sources say more than 50 people were hurt. There have been no arrests so far, but police have named a person of interest, Robert Card, 40 years old, who is considered armed and dangerous. Here is the alleged gunman captured on surveillance footage as he entered the bowling alley. We have that video. There you go. Our Elaine Keano is in Lewiston, where people are being told to shelter in place. Elaine, good morning.
Good morning to you, Anne Marie. And it's not just residents of Lewiston who are being ordered to shelter in place. It's people in the entire surrounding county. Now, as a precaution, multiple schools and businesses have been closed today as well. And residents are being told to clear the streets as hundreds of police officers work around the clock to track down that person of interest.
All right, so it's a terrible situation there. That's just from a couple of hours earlier on CBS News. We do have a caller. We'll get to you, John, in just a moment. I'm not surprised you called, by the way, John, because I know gun control is a really important issue to you, and sane, smart gun laws, just as it is to me. So we'll get to that in just a moment. You could see that shooter, by the way, with, it looked to me like some kind of a machine gun. It was very frightening to see what that gunman was toting. And just to update from that news report, the New York Times, I'm just going to turn John down a little bit because we're getting some background noise there. So just to update the story there from CBS News was 16 dead. I mentioned 18. Updated by the New York Times a couple minutes before I went live. 18 now confirmed dead, and that shooter obviously armed and dangerous. So it's a terrible, terrible situation. And we... our hearts go out, of course, to the victims and their families. I would just note we've got to just, I mean, John, what are we going to do to get these guns out of people's hands? What can we do?
Well, I mean, first thing we got to do is get the people out of Congress that are stopping, you know, any progress for getting those guns off the streets. But I think that, you know, I think 2024 is going to be a good year for, well, you know, I think for elections, it's going to be a good year because I have a feeling, you know, this guy that they just made Speaker of the House, I can't think of any way to further inflame, you know, the sentiments that voters are feeling right now.
Explain that, John. Can you explain that? Because honestly, you're certainly going to educate me here. I don't even, what's his name again? I read the story. I know I should know these things. That's on me. I wasn't really planning to focus on that topic. But yeah, please provide some detail behind your assertion that the new right wing, I understand he's an extremist, House Speaker will redound to the benefit of the Democrats politically.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that he's like hardcore evangelical and very much anti-choice. I think that is what's turning the tides right now. The NPR had a great story yesterday about the number of women who are having to, well, the number of abortions that women are getting has not gone down. They were expecting it to, and it didn't. What happened was that the number of abortions in red states went down and the number of abortions in blue states went up. And I think most of those numbers were like Colorado, Illinois, and New Mexico. Yeah, I think a lot of women from Texas are going to those places, and from the South in general. But I think that what was the name of that? What was the name of the case? It was
is it Dowd?
Oh, I forget.
Is it Dowd?
Dowd. Yeah, Dobbs. I think that really motivated a lot of people to vote. I think it's the impetus behind Taylor Swift getting all of her fans to register to vote. There's a lot of really pissed off women that are going to swing left. Some that probably consider themselves moderate. I think everybody realizes how extreme the right is now, And I think that once, I think that in 2025, starting in 2025, things are going to happen. I'm ignoring all the polls because their methods have to be flawed. The Democrats are outperforming in every single election that they're in, since Dobbs, and they're overperforming. And so, if right now the polls are telling us that Trump and Biden are neck and neck, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. So I think what a lot of those the purpose that a lot of those pollsters serve is they're throwing out numbers that may more closely reflect the outcome when you account for voter suppression. And I think voter suppression will be unprecedented in 2024, but at very least people are waking up to the fact. I remember just a few years ago, before Trump even got elected, nobody was really aware of what the GOP was doing with blue voters in their states. It just was something that never got any news coverage. If you wanted to learn about it, you had to go to Greg Palast's website. And so finally, it just takes so long for people to catch on, but finally people are catching on. I think we'll spend the rest of the 2020s, playing catch up with all the ground that we've lost. And then when it comes time to redistrict again in 2030, I think things are just going to change, And,
well, I think a lot of what you say, John, is fair. Certainly, it does appear that there is a post-Dobbs effect that's benefiting Democrats across the country. I think that's definitely a fair statement. How that will play out in individual states, I guess, we know in some states, but not in others, how that's going to play out. Probably it will help Biden in swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. On the other hand, Trump has been smart to kind of avoid taking a full-throated endorsement of making abortion illegal. He seems to, hedge on that issue a little bit, which is probably bright on his point. I don't know if we can definitely take the fact that Republicans are being outperformed as proof positive that Biden will also do better. There are factors that are specific to the national elections and specifically president. I think the foreign policy is an area where Biden may be vulnerable. You and I may differ on that, but I do think that's the case. All that said, I think, and I said this to Arlen, I would be surprised if Trump wins next year. I really would. If you look at the polling, though, he is helped by Cornel West, and he is hurt by, the presence of any kind of what do they call that, third way candidate or, RFK Jr. RFK Jr. actually
takes more
Biden.
Yeah,
he takes more Biden from Trump, which doesn't surprise me in the least.
He's cuckoo. That's why.
Well, it's
He's
the
cuckoo.
anti-vaxxer and anti-war in Ukraine positions he's taken. That make that difference.
Which and the anti-war position. Oh man, I think that Ukraine's not going to get any funding from us until. So I'm sure you like that. But,
I do.
I
absolutely do.
I think that that's going to put a strain on Europe because the Europeans realize how important it is to keep them equipped. So I think Europe is going to go into full on. They're going to be adopting a war economy. I think they're going to be putting a lot more of their resources into manufacturing munitions for Ukraine. Just to keep them alive.
Well, we'll see. I don't know if that's true. There's a lot of pro-peace sentiment in Europe as well, John. We're talking to John. It is Halitics. I've got the big image on the screen, though, is the main gunman. And you can see that military-grade hardware he's toting, John. I think this is an issue the Democrats should also try to make hay from. I mean, I hate to exploit a tragedy, but these massacres are a regular feature of America right now. And I think making Americans safer with sane gun laws would be a powerful campaign issue for Democrats.
I think it's worth mentioning, but I just don't think the average voter really gives that much weight to that issue. Everybody right now, the majority of people are always worried about the economy. I think the only people that worry about the gun issue, and like you mentioned, foreign policy and this is a phrase that you coined in one of your articles, Chardonnay sipping liberals. They're the ones who take all those things into account because the economy doesn't, is of no consequence to them. They're doing quite well. But I think the average person just doesn't, they're like, okay, great. Yeah, do something about guns. But what are you going to do for me as far as the economy goes? We're sinking. It's going to be hard to pull their attention away from that.
And yet you think, John, that the abortion issue will pull people's attention away. Or at least you're saying it'll siphon off, maybe it'll siphon off some upper middle class and affluent voters from Republicans.
Abortion is an economic issue for women, for women who are struggling. That is the issue that they have. They don't want to get stuck in a position where, because they made a mistake or something happened to them, they don't want to be punished for that economically for the rest of their lives. It's very consequential to them, and maybe other people don't see it that way, but I
think that's a great point. I appreciate that. Yeah. I think that you make a great point. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just think when it comes down to it, I don't think the gun issue really, people see it as an economic issue. I think the people who are directly affected by it, like if you lost somebody at Sandy Hook or you lost somebody in this shooting, they will be, motivated to give that more weight when they go vote. But I don't think it's going to be, like I said, I think it's worth mentioning, but I think that the Democrats really need to continue telling the people what they're going to do for them as far as the economy. And they should really get away from talking about issues that affect less than 1% of the population, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't help people who fall into the transgender category. What I'm saying is that, while they're in Congress, of course, they should add amendments to bills that protect them. But what they should really, really be talking about is Medicare for all, and how they're going to start supporting that and really get affordable health care out there for people and do away with medical bankruptcy, because people who work their whole lives, and maybe some people aren't even able to save a retirement because they put all their money into the mortgage in their house. They put all their money into their house. The older you get, the more expensive that insurance gets. And if you don't get it through your employer, there's a lot of people still being beat up by the healthcare system in spite of, Obamacare. There are just, middle income earners who, maybe.
Well, I would argue, John, I would argue, in fact, that some of them are getting beaten up because of Obamacare. It has not ultimately bent down the hockey stick, right? The ever increasing costs of healthcare just have not stopped rising. And if you're lucky enough to have decent care, you're fine, but lots of people aren't. I also know one other point, I'll let you get back and then I'll let you go. But, so, we have the negotiations, right? They're starting. So some drugs aren't as expensive as they were. I think notably it's insulin. But where there are drugs that aren't covered, right, where there aren't negotiations, we're seeing giant hikes in the cost of some of them because the drug manufacturers are looking to make up and keep their profit margins as high as they've always been, to tell the shareholders things are going great, and keep the profits and keep the bonuses for the top management. And so if you're on another drug, your other medication, you're not benefiting at all from the negotiations for a few kinds of drugs.
Yeah, and the only people who are really covered and not necessarily with just medication, but like if you just live in poverty or right above the poverty line, you've got some pretty good coverage. You've got pretty good access to healthcare. The access isn't great, but most people accept like Medi-Cal and Medicaid, or they take on a certain percentage of their clients as Medi-Cal or Medicaid patients. And it pretty much covers everything. But you have to be in that position first. And you can't have it's not based on your income. It's based on your income and your assets. So once you start accumulating assets in this country, you become so vulnerable. You work so hard to acquire things that, get your house paid off. Like maybe that's your retirement strategy, pay the house off first and then start to save. Well, if you're not adequately insured, you can still lose your house. You can still get a lien filed on your house, and they can still take everything that and especially when you get into your 50s, it becomes worrisome because
I would say this, except for the multimillionaire class, John, everyone in this country is economically insecure, which does, by the way, strongly support your argument that the Democrats should talk about the economy. The problem is that they are also captive, and I can argue about this, but I think they're just as captive to the forces of greed and Wall Street wealth and capital as the Republicans are.
I don't know about that because and the reason I disagree is that even my representative Jimmy Panetta, which you would think very much establishment, has signed on to Medicare for all. I don't think he's a member of the House Progressive Caucus, but I think he understands that the people need this. So obviously, health insurance companies aren't getting behind him, and I doubt if pharmaceutical companies are either, because I bet you anything he supports, capping their profits as well. So I just think that I think we're getting so close. We're getting so close. There are no Republicans that want to make healthcare cheaper. And, unfortunately, there are still quite a few Democratic representatives that like the status quo, which is really harmful.
I'll just push back real quick on the Democratic issue. I think it's pretty easy, and get your response, John, and then I'm going to hang up on you because I got to go. I got a couple more stories, but
okay.
I love to have my callers give them as much time as possible. Just to push back real quickly, it's pretty easy it's pretty cost-free for Panetta to embrace Medicare for all. I'm not saying it's totally cost-free. As you point out, he probably is forgoing some contributions from healthcare. But he's in a safe seat. You could almost refer to it as the Panetta seat right now. So he doesn't have to worry too much about keeping that seat. And I'm sure there are other corporations that are happy to contribute to the Panetta name, the Panetta brand. But when push came to shove in California, Governor Newsom made it clear he wasn't going to support Medicare for all. During the pandemic, Governor Newsom was entertained by healthcare lobbyists at the French Laundry while not wearing a mask. So while I do agree with you that Democrats certainly will often pay lip service, some of them, to healthcare, to broadening its accessibility, and even to Medicare for all, we've also seen, when push comes to shove, powerful, oftentimes considered progressive Democrats pulling back.
You're absolutely right, and he campaigned on single payer in California, and this was right after the legislature sent single payer to Jerry Brown, I think twice, and he vetoed it twice. We thought, well, for sure, if this guy gets elected, the legislature will send single payer to him and he'll sign it because he was supportive of it. And then as soon as he got elected, you didn't hear a word about it. Nobody in the media saying, hey, what's this, you were talking about single payer. How's that going along? It just vanished. It's just into thin air. It vanished. So yes, you're right. There's we've got a problem. It's I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, the only thing you can do, you got to laugh to keep from crying. You got to laugh to keep from crying. John, thanks so much. I really appreciate your call. I do. I hate to hang up on any of my callers because I appreciate them, and I also appreciate that I don't get that many. So I want to have them on as much as possible. By the way, you heard the hang up. But I do also want to end the program by talking about a couple of politicians, or actually one politician, one pundit that I have very few kind words for. One I've talked about a lot, the other less so. But Jamie Raskin, I don't think has been that bad on Israel. This is a letter back on May 24th of this year where he does really go after Netanyahu. And I want to give him credit. Now, I said that it was somewhat cost-free for Panetta, Jimmy, not totally, but somewhat cost-free for him to endorse Medicare for all. It's somewhat cost-free for Raskin to criticize Netanyahu. His district will certainly support this in general, and how Netanyahu has been going after the courts and trying to maintain, complete control of Israel, despite the fact that less than half the people who live there, less than half the voters, forgetting about Palestinians, but who aren't voting, who aren't allowed to vote, but those Israelis who can vote, less than half support him. So Raskin isn't really skating on any kind of thin ice as far as he's concerned, except when it comes maybe to AIPAC. But I don't think AIPAC is going to sway a lot of voters. He's got a safe seat here in the 8th District. So, it's not so difficult for Raskin to criticize Netanyahu. Also, because Raskin lives in such a deep blue district, the support for Netanyahu has dropped because Trump has embraced Netanyahu. And it's easy to draw parallels between Netanyahu and Trump. So I'm not going to give Raskin, a big attaboy or a round of applause. But yes, what you wrote here criticizing what Netanyahu was doing and is doing, I think you deserve some credit. So I'm going to give it to you. You refer to the Palestinians as citizens. You call out the confiscation of Palestinian property. And you note in this letter that the settlements on the West Bank are illegal. And that this is very, very harmful to Palestinian civilians and does exacerbate tension. So yes, I do give you credit. Maybe a little bit of grudging credit. Maybe I note you didn't really go out on some kind of a limb or put yourself in great political risk, Raskin, but you did something. So I do want that to be recognized. So there you stood up for Palestinians and you stood against Netanyahu. I'm going to give you, grudging credit. I'm going to also now, because we're talking about the current hostilities, is that the right word? I don't really want to call it a war. Raskin calls it a war. It's basically Israel just killing civilians at this point, and I guess some Hamas terrorists. And I just want to put, this is again from Raskin. So he, touches all the bases that pro-Israel Israeli supporters want him to touch. He goes after Hamas. He agrees. By the way, I disagree strongly that what Hamas did demands a forceful and strategic response in a just war of self-defense. It's a crime. It should be treated like a crime. So he does touch on those bases, but he does say the war, which I don't think it is, should be carefully contained. He does note that the Palestinians, and he calls them people, which many Israelis are not referring to them as people, but calling them animals and the like. So he does recognize that they're human beings in Palestine and they should not be punished. He says they cannot be punished. Well, they are being punished for the activities of Hamas. It's not right. But he does pull back a little bit, Raskin does, from full-throated unconditional support for Israel. And I mean, maybe that's the most we can expect of our electeds. It's pretty weak tea. It's not nearly good enough. It may not even be good at all. In fact, it isn't good at all, because he should be demanding a ceasefire. He should be calling for an end to the occupation of the West Bank. He should be calling for a one-state solution, which he doesn't do any of that. But, okay, he could be worse. So I'm going to give him that. Very grudging, but something. If you want to see that as, I'm trying to be as open-minded as I can be. Here's another individual I don't have a lot of positive feelings towards. Haven't talked about her very much. Every now and then maybe her name has come up. I know some other hosts really, really, really dislike Rachel Maddow, and I would count myself in that group. I just don't spend a lot of time talking about her. But here she is with Nicole Wallace, again, talking about Israel-Palestine. And, she kind of makes some points that I think are legitimate, so I want to play them. They're undermined, of course, by Nicole Wallace, but let's at least get this in. Oh, hearing her? There we go. Unmute.
Indeed, in lots of places in the region right now, those protests are breaking out because of the perception that this was a deliberate Israeli airstrike targeting that hospital on purpose.
Right, so she's talking about that airstrike about a week ago, which originally was attributed to Israel. Now, or since then, questions have arisen whether it was Israel targeting the hospital. Again, I don't think this is the most important story. I mean, I think it's really important that the hospital was hit. But I don't think that if you can somehow conclude legitimately it was a Hamas missile going astray, what good does that really do Israel when you look at the moral balance? Israel is still bombing southern Gaza, where they told Gazans to flee. Israel has still killed thousands and thousands and thousands of Gazans, and is turning their little country, little region into rubble. So, okay, they don't get blamed for this. What about all the other things? Killing and bombing a bakery. People making bread. You can't excuse, none of that is excused. But, okay, let's listen to a little more of what Maddow's saying here.
You have to believe, we as humans have to believe that the truth matters. We do not want that to be true. Israel says that was not true. An investigation needs to be done to find out if it was true. But you have to believe, you can't say it doesn't matter what the truth is here. And you can't say the street will erupt no matter what, regardless of what the truth is here. The truth does matter. It's the only thing that we have. It's the only.
Now, it's really funny that she said, now I agree with her. I totally 100,000% agree with Maddow. The truth is what matters more than anything else. And if people don't like the truth, too bad. That's what matters. 100%. But what's so ironic about that is for her, it's never seemed to matter very much. She spent all that time, the walls are closing in on Trump. Remember, years and years of this based on the bogus Russiagate investigation. And she's never come clean that it was fake, that it was false, that it was based on, the Clinton campaign's fevered dreams. She's never acknowledged that. So it's kind of rich for her to start talking about how important the truth is. For Maddow, the truth has always been secondary to her hyper-partisan, hyperbolic, wordy, verbose broadcasts. So, I mean, it's ironic, but she's right here. So I guess I give her credit. I want to move on because what little credit I would give her, I have to take away from Nicole Wallace for her response, which I found so, just wrong. I mean, just immoral. So let's go to Wallace's response.
In the West Bank
here.
And that's outside the Israeli embassy.
Page. So let's see if we can get it. Here we go.
I guess the only place to keep going here is the we isn't everybody, right? It doesn't include the Hamas terrorists.
So she's saying the Hamas terrorists aren't we. They're not human beings. They don't care about the truth. The truth doesn't matter to them. And I mean, where is that coming from? The truth is Israel has been settling in the West Bank. They have been divvying up lands that were set aside after the partition, after the mandate and the partition in 1947-48. They are taking lands that were Palestinian lands. They have been killing Palestinian civilians and children in Gaza at a multiple rate that's multiply greater than many times greater than the number of Israelis that are being killed. So I don't know where Wallace would ever. I mean, I get it. It's just an argument, right? It's just you just say it. You just say it because you want to, I guess, side with what the weapons manufacturers and the generals and stuff who come on your program. I mean, I don't really know, but of course the truth matters to Hamas. For her to say it doesn't is absolutely absurd. Now, there's also the fact that in war, the truth is always the first casualty. But the ultimate truth is that Israel is oppressing Palestinians. And that is the truth that has given Hamas a lot of power and a lot of influence. And is why many feel around the world that you can't just condemn them for the atrocities they committed or take them out of context. So, Wallace is just totally wrong.
It says. I mean, they're not part of the we. And I think that's why
we're
U.S.
not
Secretary of
human.
State
Look,
Antony
look
Blinken
at that Maddow nodding. Oh, yeah, no, they're not human. They're not we. They don't. The truth doesn't matter.
His first two stops in Israel and in Doha, one of the first things he said from the podium, alongside his counterparts, was Hamas will use Palestinian civilians as human shields. It is what they do. Lloyd Austin said the same thing.
That's what Israel says, but that's how Israel justifies killing civilians, dropping bombs on innocent people. I mean, does the truth matter to Israel? Doesn't appear so. Doesn't appear to. If the truth really mattered to Israel so much, wouldn't they stop the killing now? Because it's only making them less safe and threatening a three-front war. A war in the south, a war in the north with Hezbollah, and a war in the east with the Palestinians on the West Bank. So for her to say that, Wallace to say that, is just, it's obscene. For her to somehow separate out Hamas as some kind of unique evil for whom facts don't matter, the truth doesn't matter. Yes, all sides, all people use propaganda. But how often has the truth even mattered on MSNBC? They have never come clean when it comes to their role in promoting all manner of bogus narratives. So I can't, take any of that crap seriously. But all that said, yes, there's my little atta-girl to Rachel Maddow because she did say the truth matters. So I appreciate that. I'll be back tomorrow. It will be the free-for-all. I hope to hear from you. Enjoy the rest of your day. And again, last time I'll say it today, maybe I need to put a little sort of a pop-up or an animation or something that says click on subscribe. But it's right there, bottom right of your screen. Have a great day.